As the hunt for survivors continues, a woman is rescued after 6 days in a collapsed building in Kenya. A new study's grim news about fatal medical errors. And a final fall from grace as a former Republican presidential candidate takes a tumble. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening, this is Africa 54. I'm Esther Githo-Ewart. Vincent Makori is off today. We begin our broadcast this evening with the incredible rescue of a Kenyan woman trapped for 6 days in the rubble of a collapsed building in Nairobi. Kenya's disaster management unit says that military engineers had to break through the slabs of concrete and twisted steel support rods that had the woman pinned in. Medics managed to give the woman oxygen and intravenous administer water and glucose. A crowd applauded in celebration as the woman was carried away on a stretcher, covered by a blanket and with an oxygen tank by her side, to a Red Cross ambulance. The rescue was broadcast live on Kenyan television. A top Kenyan Red Cross official says the death toll from the disaster has risen to at least 36, with 70 others still missing. The two owners of the collapsed building were released on $5,000 bail on Wednesday as they await formal charges from police. Last year, Kenya's National Construction Authority found that 58% of buildings in Nairobi are unfit for habitation. Following up on a story we brought you yesterday, Kenyan police say they have Muhammad Abdi Ali in custody after his arrest last Friday. Ali is suspected of being a key member of an Islamist militant group that was plotting attacks similar to the 2013 Westgate shopping mall attack. Police say the foiled plot included plans for a biological terror attack using anthrax, an infectious bacteria that spreads rapidly once spores get into the body. For more insight on this story, joining us on the phone from Nairobi is Ty McCormick of Foreign Policy magazine. Good evening, Ty.
Hi, good evening. Thanks for having me on.
Since the Kenyan authorities made this announcement, Ty, what more do we know about this foiled plot?
Well, you know, Esther, I think what we should say right off the bat is that basically everything we know about this supposed ISIS anthrax plot comes from that initial press statement from Kenyan authorities. Police claim that they arrested this medical student who was plotting along with several accomplices this biological attack, which they said was going to be on the scale of the Westgate Mall attack, which of course killed 67 people in 2013. But beyond that, we really don't know much. You know, how imminent was this attack? Was anthrax actually discovered inside Kenya? What was the target? How was ISIS actually involved? I think authorities have said that the group was, quote, ISIS-linked, but they haven't named it and they haven't elaborated on those linkages.
So, Ty,
I think it's also worth noting. Oh, go ahead, please. Yes,
so given that not much is really known at this point, are Kenyans skeptical about this announcement, or are they cautious about the threat of terror?
Sure. I think Kenyans rightly have a lot of questions here. Several human rights activists have come forward and said that some of the suspects had previously been arrested and that this entire plot had been concocted after the fact in order to mask their disappearances. So I think without a great deal more information, it's impossible to say which one of these narratives is closer to the truth, or, you know, if both of them contain elements of the truth. Of course, it does make a certain amount of sense that the Islamic State would want to make inroads in Kenya. There are plenty of targets in Kenya that there aren't in, say, Somalia. And there's at least some degree of popular support for ISIS here. But do they actually have the organizational capacity to make something like this happen? I just don't think that there's evidence to suggest that they do.
And Ty, given that the authorities have mentioned terrorist groups like ISIS, is there any call from the Kenyan authorities for international help or intervention in trying to foil a possible terrorist attack in Nairobi?
Well, I think you've hit on something important, which is that, you know, these are governments, the Kenyan government and other governments in the region, the Ugandan government, the Somalian government, in particular, that have aided a great deal. They benefited greatly from the war on terror. It got security assistance what they would be able to muster on their own. So the bigger and the scarier and the more being on top of defeating that threat, I think the more scary it is, since they're likely to squeeze out of Western governments. So to the extent I think this could very well be an incidence of highlighting that may actually in order to in the long run be for citizens.
All right, Ty, we're getting a little trouble with the phone there, but thank you so much for your insight. Ty McCormick is a journalist with Foreign Policy magazine, speaking to us from Nairobi, Kenya. The European Commission's plan to deal with Europe's worst migrant crisis in decades is already meeting resistance. The plan includes a fairness mechanism requiring nations to accept a set of number of refugees or pay a de facto fine. Nations like Poland and Hungary have refused to accept large numbers of Muslim migrants, citing concerns that doing so would destabilize their largely homogeneous societies. Now, Turkish citizens could soon benefit from visa-free travel to Europe as part of the recent deal between the EU and Ankara to stem the flow of refugees. In return, Turkey has pledged to keep the migrants on Turkish soil and crack down on those who are smuggling them. Brussels is set to publish its latest progress report soon, but as Henry Ridgwell reports from London, many EU lawmakers are threatening to veto the deal over human rights concerns.
European Union figures show just over 26,000 migrants arrived on the Greek islands in March, less than half February's total. EU officials say the deal with Ankara is working.
And if we did nothing, we would condemn Greece to become a huge, huge refugee camp with hundreds of thousands of refugees stuck. That is what we needed to solve.
Turkey says it is on track to meet all the criteria laid down by Europe and insists the visa waiver for its citizens is a non-negotiable part of the migrant deal. But in Germany, analysts say fears over a wave of Kurdish asylum seekers from Turkey are driving support for the anti-immigration parties. The escalating conflict between Kurdish PKK rebels and the Turkish government is exacerbating those fears, but they are misplaced, says Regents University's Ibrahim Sekechi.
Any Kurdish citizens of Turkey applying for asylum in Europe will be refused. It will be desk rejection, immediate rejection, and this has been the case anyway for a long while.
While right-wing politicians may benefit from fears of migration, some lawmakers in Brussels have threatened to try to block the deal with Turkey over human rights concerns. Amnesty International accuses Ankara of forcefully returning hundreds of unregistered refugees back to Syria.
Just as it's illegal for Turkey to be sending refugees back to the very conflict zones that they're fleeing, it's no less illegal for the EU to be sending refugees from those areas back to a country that's sending them on.
It's not only the rights of refugees in the spotlight. Critics say fundamental rights are under attack. Prosecutors have opened more than 1,800 cases against people for insulting President Recep Tayyip Erdogan since 2014. Nobel Prize-winning author Orhan Pamuk spoke out Tuesday.
This is about only silencing political opposition. This is about intimidating people and scaring the country so that no one criticizes the government. It's all about that.
Sekechi argues Europe's actions negate any claim of moral superiority in Brussels.
Abandoning a huge population who are in need of humanitarian protection. And we say, okay, instead of taking and helping you, we will just let you stay wherever you are, and instead we will pay Turkey €6 billion to keep our borders shut down. I mean, that is what Europe is losing.
Even as Europe attempts to close one route, another is expanding fast. Tens of thousands of migrants have made the journey from Libya to Italy in recent weeks, and more are expected as summer brings calmer seas. Henry Ridgwell for VOA News, London.
In the global war on terrorism, an Australian citizen suspected of being a top recruiter for the Islamic State has been killed in a US airstrike in Iraq. In a radio interview Thursday, Australian Attorney General George Brandis said that Melbourne native Neil Prakash died in an airstrike in Mosul on April 29th. He says his death is significant in the international fight against Islamic State terrorists.
Prakash was a very important high-value target. He was the most dangerous Australian involved with ISIL in the Middle East. He was actively involved both in recruitment and in encouraging domestic terrorist events in Australia. He was the principal Australian reaching back from the Middle East into Australia, and in particular to terrorist networks in both Melbourne and Sydney, encouraging lone wolf attacks and more sophisticated attacks. So he was the person of greatest concern to us.
Now, the Attorney General also said he was informed by the United States that another Australian, Shadi Jabbar Khalil Mohammed, was killed in an airstrike in Syria last month, along with her Sudanese husband, both recruiters for Islamic State. Mohammed was the sister of Fahad Jabbar, a 15-year-old who shot and killed a civilian police employee in Sydney last October. Jabbar was killed in a gunfight with police shortly afterward. We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54, and check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Coming up. This is BizBeat.
Somehow, some way, Bert Morsbach was going to make it happen.
Do I go back to Bangkok and continue my consulting business, or do I do something and do my dream, which I always wanted to do, grow wine?
Morsbach's founder and CEO of Ithea Vineyard, in a country with a very small middle class and whose tropical climate is not conducive to wineries. Still, like any vineyard, workers collect grapes, crush the harvest, cool the juice in vats, bottle and label it, and voila, Myanmar wine at the Ithea Vineyard. Morsbach's partner is experienced winemaker Hans Edward Leinendecker.
These conditions are not made for grapes, and the wine plant is not a tropical plant.
A shorter day and rainy seasons, the opposite climate of California's Napa Valley or France's Bordeaux region. But where there's a dream and determination, there's a way, and Ithea Vineyard produces 150,000 bottles of wine a year. For BOA's BizBeat, I'm Philip Alexio.
Now it's time for Health Report, and joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Mudu with a look at medical errors study. Lino?
In a new study published in the medical journal BMJ, researchers from the Johns Hopkins University say more than 250,000 deaths are caused by medical errors every year. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention keeps the official statistics about leading causes of death in the U.S., but the researchers say the CDC's way of collecting data, quote, fails to classify medical errors separately on the death certificate. The researchers looked at death rate data from 2000 to 2008, as well as hospitalization rates from 2013. They determined that medical errors represent 9.5% of all deaths in the U.S. each year, making it the third leading cause of death in the country. Now, in its recently released annual report, the Global Health Technologies Coalition, or GHTC, says the United States needs to provide sufficient and stable funding in the global health arena, in research and development, to better respond to health crises like Zika and Ebola. I sat down with Erin Will-Morton, the GHTC Coalition Director, to discuss the issue.
We were relieved to see the end of Ebola. And of course, we were all very surprised when Zika happened. And I think when we fought Ebola and responded as quickly as we did and efficiently as we did, we didn't know what was going to be next. And it was shocking when we found out about Zika. And unfortunately, we're in the same position where we don't have the tools that we need to fight Zika. There's no drug to treat the virus. There's no vaccine to prevent it. and the diagnostic tools are inadequate.
GHTC released its annual report talking about the issue.
This year's report really looked at the need for sustained investments in research and development to reach the goals that we've set for ourselves in global health. You know, epidemics like Zika and Ebola are only part of the global health challenge that we face. We have ongoing threats like HIV, AIDS, malaria, TB, and these diseases need ongoing research and development, sustained investments in R&D to ensure that we have the tools ready to fight epidemics like Zika and Ebola, but also to address the sort of the ongoing global health threats that we continue to face.
Any lessons learned from Ebola that can be used with Zika?
I think we did learn some lessons from Ebola, and one of the things that the report points to is the sort of need for coordination among the U.S. agencies as part of the response to Ebola. We saw them work really effectively together, the CDC, the Department of Defense, USAID, to develop what was called the Ebola Grand Challenge, to really ask people to come together around the development of new tools and new technologies that could be used to fight the Ebola outbreak. And that coordination was really key in the U.S. government's response to the outbreak.
President Obama proposed recently to move the remaining funds from Ebola to tackle Zika. But in a perfect world, where would the money come from?
Well, we need new money. We can't move money from Ebola to fight Zika. You know, that's just not an option. We're not finished with Ebola. It's not done. We haven't solved the problem or the crisis completely. And so we really do need new money to address something like Zika. It's asking too much of U.S. government agencies to move money from one epidemic to another. We're just, taking money from one public health threat to fight something else, and that's not the best way to do research and development.
But where should the money come from?
The U.S. government is the #1 investor in global health research and development, and it has to continue to be a leader in that space, and we have to continue to make those investments. And if we make them long-term and sustain those investments, it won't be as expensive as responding to emergencies like Zika and Ebola, where we have to put much more money forward immediately.
We are in an election year. What will be something that will resonate?
I think we want to hear from the candidates that they support the understanding for a need for R&D, and there's an importance for the U.S., the leader of the U.S., to understand the important role that the U.S. plays in leading in science and in research and development, and those are the kinds of things you want to hear from a candidate who is going to continue that message and understand the importance of U.S. leadership in global health research and development.
Now let's talk policy in terms of the policy actions that the U.S. government must take to accelerate development of urgently needed tools.
Well, the report really looks at 3 different big goals that we think the U.S. government could take on in terms of moving research and development forward. The first is really sustained investment and sustained funding. We can't solve our global health crises without public funding. And public funding is not enough. We need some sort of new incentives or new ways to incentivize global health research and development. We need to be encouraging private sector to be involved in research and development. The second thing is really the coordination that I talked about, the U.S. agencies coordinating with one another and outside of the U.S. government as well at the multilateral level. And the third is really the sort of strengthening of regulatory capacity. Research and development is about developing new tools and technologies, but we need to ensure that they're safe and effective when they get into the hands of people who are going to be using them.
Have you seen progress in the reports?
Well, we have seen progress in global health R&D, and one of the things that the report points to this year, which is pretty exciting, is that we have almost 500 global health products in the pipeline, and just under 10 years ago we had only 200. And so we've really seen progress in that way. We've seen new developments, we've seen new tools and technologies come into the pipeline, and so we are making progress. But there's a lot of concern that if we cut back funding or funding doesn't continue to grow, we won't be able to continue that progress.
And that's our health report for today. To stay in touch, find me on Twitter at Lenore Moudou. Esther?
Thanks, Lino, and be sure to watch Lenore Moudou's health reports every Tuesday and Thursday right here on Africa 54. It's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54. A presidential candidate drops out of the race as his running mate drops out of sight. We'll be right back.
Through the UNA.
We need the economy to recover to wholeheartedly embark on that road.
The judiciary is there, which this house should.
She'll be here holding it. It'll just be.
I wanted to present music and a side of American culture that is most important to me, that is a part of who I am. They're going to get some incredible performances. That's one of the things I love, bringing these artists in so you can get to see them do what they do. It's soul music, and that's what music is. It's that which comes from the soul.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what's trending. Tuesday wasn't a good day for former presidential candidate Ted Cruz. Not only did the senator lose to Donald Trump in the Indiana primary, but his newly minted running mate, former Republican presidential candidate Carly Fiorina, fell through a trap door on the stage. The bizarre accident took place moments after Cruz's wife and children appeared from behind a curtain. Not surprisingly, social media went wild, and the video went quickly viral, racking up over 2 million views on YouTube in less than 24 hours. In other social media news, a woman who filed a lawsuit against Starbucks is facing a whirlwind of controversy on the internet. Chicago resident Stacey Pincus filed a proposed $5 million class action suit against the coffee giant earlier this week, alleging that the chain is burning their customers when it comes to their iced beverages. Pincus also accuses Starbucks of using intentionally misleading advertising practices. While some commenters sympathize, others are calling the suit a classic first world problem. And finally, a reminder that social media can also be used for good. What started as a simple fundraising drive in a tiny Northern Territory town in Australia turned into a rousing success when the community's online request for second-hand clothing donations went viral. Donations poured in from across the country. Now the town is celebrating its first ever pop-up shop. The opening day was a bargain hunter's dream. The store's proceeds will be used to buy sewing materials and paint for a growing arts center. And that's what's trending today. Stand-up comedy is gaining popularity in Africa. Comedians are becoming household names, earning fame and recognition. Ugandan comedian Kenneth Kimuli, also known as Pablo, is no exception. Here's VOA's Paul Ndiho.
Comedians are as funny as ever and can turn your bad day into a better day with their hilarious jokes.
My grandmother finally quit smoking after 30 years. Yeah, she was smoking fish.
Inspired mainly by American comedians, Kenneth Kimuli is known as Uganda's king of comedy. He started doing stand-up in 2003, but it wasn't until 2009 when he won a comedy competition called Stand Up Uganda that he rose to fame.
A policeman will say that's being idle and disorderly. A housewife will say those are bad manners.
I always tell people that I knew I'd become a stand-up comedian the day I was born. Yeah, because when I was born, my dad walked into the maternity ward, took a look at the baby, and asked my mother one question: is this a joke? And here I am, a living joke.
Pablo, a professional journalist turned comedian, has a quick wit and unpredictability that makes him a natural entertainer.
I've seen very many people who have dropped what they started to come into comedy. We have engineers who have now said, you know what, I have the degree in engineering, let me go into comedy. I did a degree in journalism, mass media, and creative writing. I'm still doing comedy. And also the fact that the international community, as I speak right now, we have very many people who have come into Uganda looking for stand-up comedians. And now, as I speak, we also have Ugandans who are writing on the international scene. We have one of the Ugandans who's a writer for Trevor Noah, who happens to be a lawyer. Yeah. So you can see that I always tell my comedian friends that the future for comedy in Uganda, every comedian should buy shades because the future is bright.
Pablo has wooed everyone with his unique African-infused brand of comedy and humor, selling out venues across Africa.
What's your favorite job?
I helped our neighbor who wanted to commit suicide. He had prepared the rope to hang himself, and when he was about to hang himself, he saw Pablo standing there. I was just 9 years old, and he told me, "What do you want?" I told him, "Go ahead, I'm only waiting for your shoes." And the man changed his mind.
Arthur Lutaro, an independent industry analyst, says the government needs to pay attention to this growing industry.
A team of young, energetic, talented fellows who are really, really progressing in this industry. And I must say that if the government, for example, has really not seen that potential in them, I think it is high time they started putting eyes on them, because it's one hell of an industry.
15 years ago, being a comedian was not a known profession. And in Uganda, it's still a bit informal.
Being a young, of course, and emerging industry, it's composed of young people. These are people who are below the age of 30, most of them. And when you look at the environment within which they are operating, I think they are doing it on their own. They are pushing themselves.
In Uganda, there are few full-time comedy clubs and no real circuits for stand-up comics to perform. But the burgeoning comedy scene in Uganda is exciting, and it's impressive to see how polished Pablo is for someone who has only been doing stand-up for a few years. Pablo now believes that comedy is being taken seriously as a career path in Uganda. Paul Niho, VOA News.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight, at 1800 UTC, and in the mornings to Daybreak Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks for watching, and good night from Washington.
If you come to a bridge and want to get to the other side, chances are you will cross it. But is crossing a bridge really what Jonathan and Anna are talking about?
Cross that bridge when you come to it.
Whew. It took me all day to ship my materials to Paris for the pop-up book conference. Now I have to book my flight and hotel.
What if there aren't any hotel rooms available in Paris? You know, many people travel there this time of year.
Oh, I'll cross that bridge when I come to it.
Yeah, don't worry. I'm sure you'll find a room. Yeah, maybe.
This useful expression means you do not want to worry about a possible future problem. Instead, you will deal with the problem if it happens. Usually, this idiom means there are many things to worry about, and you are not willing to focus on a problem that is only a maybe. And that's English in a minute.